Good morning, friends, and welcome back to the Friday morning discussions. We're starting off with what some would say a controversial subject. Today, we have Stuart Morton, who will be discoursing and leading a discussion upon racism. Stuart, when you're ready.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. As I think most people in Britain Yearly Meeting will be aware at the moment, this is a rising issue. And for most of us, it creates a degree of discomfort. This has also been true for me. And I thought perhaps I would just divide the introduction into three parts. First of all, just an introduction to me personally and why I've got involved in this issue of responding to racism. Secondly, my understanding of how Quakers in Britain have come to this issue within the last 40 years. And then thirdly, to hopefully engage with you a little bit around the paper that a group of us wrote towards the end of last year, and which we presented to the Central England Quaker area meeting in February or March of this year. That paper was accepted by the area meeting, and a group of us have become what is called the Central England Quakers Recognised Group on Responding to Racism. So we ourselves have made a bit of a journey in helping to bring the area meeting into both a greater awareness, but also a recognition that this is something that as a Quaker meeting, as an area meeting, we want to address. Personally, as you can see, I'm white, I'm male. I'm married to Wilhelmina, who is a Black woman from Namibia in Southern Africa. We married in 1985, having met at Woodbrook in 1983, where I was a staff member. I was on the staff at Woodbrook from 1980 until 96, and then later became a member of staff at Friends House on the South Asia work, Quaker Peace and Service. I think I've been very fortunate in my life. I was brought up working class, born 1946, had opportunities that my parents' generation never had. Went to teacher training college. And one of the big sort of turning points in my life really was going on voluntary service overseas to northern Nigeria, where I was a teacher trainer. Just prior to that, I'd come into touch with the Society of Friends through a work camp. I'd been very interested in the work camp movement. I had been brought up in the Church of Scotland, where I was born, but also later the Methodist Church. So my background is white, male, Christian, originally working class, heterosexual, and fortunate to get an education. And I don't think I fully realized until recently how privileged I've been. And privilege gives us power. So in this personal journey, I remember towards the end of the 1970s in St Albans meeting, one of the members there had raised the issue of racism in British society. At that time, it was almost a fearful issue. You know, one felt that this was almost right-wing nationalism against those of us who believed in a better community. 1979, I remember taking a course on racism in St Albans Abbey, So I was sort of aware and interested, but I think what really has hit me has been in being on the staff at Woodbrook. We were in touch in the 80s in particular with the South African liberation movements. And my wife was a member of the Southwest African People's Organization, the Namibian liberation movement. And looking back on those years, one of the things my wife says to me is, well, of course, under the apartheid regime of Southern Africa, South Africa, Namibia, we knew exactly where we stood. We were at the bottom of the ladder. We were third class. There was no doubt where the white Afrikaner population was. Everything was clear. We had a strong sense of community. In Britain, it's been a very different experience. The experience of isolation, exclusion, has been very subtle in Britain. Sometimes not so subtle. And one of the challenges for me, I think, has been that being so involved in the Quaker movement, which I so much trusted and so much felt a part of, and feeling these are genuinely good people trying to find a better way forward to build a better world. And in many ways, that's still true. But I realized that for Wilhelmina, this was not so straightforward. And we became involved in the 90s with the group of Black, Brown, people of color grouping that produced a video explaining some of the experiences that people of this minority of color were experiencing in Quaker meetings. And I was quite involved in presenting this to the Quaker community in Britain at one of the big Swanwick gatherings. And we were showing this video and trying to get the membership on board. And I noticed that there was one Black person in this group of whatever it was, 80 or 90 Quakers. And towards the end of the weekend, I approached her and I said, well, how had it been for her? Because this race issue was up front in that particular gathering. She said, well, partway through the weekend, one of the participants of the Quaker group came up to me and said, which group are you part of? Because if those of you who've been to Swanwick know very often that there are several groups going on at the same time, and there were other groups going on. So this Black woman was approached, and turned out she was a Black academic from Liverpool. And this woman approached her and said, well, which of the other groups do you belong to? So this led me to realize, goodness, even although she was sitting in our Quaker group, she had been invisible to some or many of those present, and that there was, as I've increasingly understood, a sense that Quakers in Britain are assumed to be white. This is the default position that particular incident seemed to highlight for me. So this issue of racism has hit me very personally within my marriage. And I've seen in the Society of Friends how difficult it has been for us to feel this. And I believe we are people of hugely good intention. So this has led me to get involved further. And one of the key moments, which I can perhaps I'll just show you, if I can find a way of sharing the screen, I'll just show you something. I'm looking for something. In 2018, we were at a Quaker Africa interest group, and my wife noticed this little booklet called Owning Power and Privilege, Toolkit for Change. And from that booklet in Selly Oak meeting, we ran a number of sessions about diversity and inclusion. And in a way, that was the beginning of a journey. And then the pandemic hit us. And one of the great benefits of that pandemic was that a course was put on in 2020, which over 90 Quakers began to attend. It ended up, after a good number of weeks or even months, with over 70 of us being very committed to this 2020 event, the course on Black Lives Matter, Whiteness and Racial Justice Learning for Quakers. And this course was a game changer for me. In some ways, it moved me from my head to my guts, because it took the view that those of us who are white in British society have a power which we did not understand that we had, and elements of that power were not elements we had earned. They had come to us through the history of empire, the history of industrialization, the economic system that was set up under a Western agenda. And Quakers in Britain too had been part of this great benefit. But I think it meant that our awareness was clouded. My awareness was clouded. And so thankfully, the yearly meeting has been able to move forward through Meeting for Sufferings, through Britain Yearly Meeting. And we now have a statement from the 2020 Britain Yearly Meeting Epistle. The issues of privilege and climate justice, which have been exercising our yearly meeting, are still urgent. Inequalities have been exacerbated by the pandemic and the response to it. Tackling systemic racism is a spiritual imperative. The impact of the changes in the climate grows. Work and learning on these issues continues around the yearly meeting. And so it proceeded. And most recently, we now have a Swarthmore lecture, which has helped to address this issue. A very interesting title. For those of you who've heard the Swarthmore lecture, as I remember the story, there was a big fish talking to some little fish and said, have you noticed the temperature of the water? To which the little fish said, what do you mean by water? And so it feels to me like we have reached a degree of awareness and hope that we're beginning to understand the water in which we swim. And some of us are earlier in the journey than others. But this is very challenging. And within our own meetings, there will be challenges. We've already had at least 2 events in Selly Oak meeting that have needed to be thought through, addressed. Not easy. But of course, it's not easy for Black people in our meetings. My wife has experienced many situations where she's felt on the sidelines, that her competence is under question, that her ability to use English as a third language means that people have to listen more. But why should we listen more? You know, she's one of our meeting. So she feels this is difficult. And I now understand better and have failed her on many occasions. So this is a bit about my personal journey, the Quaker journey, and I do recognize that just perhaps to show if I can find a way of stopping to share this one and go into another one, I hope. Don't know whether this is it or not. Yes, I came across this morning. I've been quite close for many years to Diana Francis, and I believe she belongs to this Rethinking Security Network. And I noticed that we're all facing these huge questions. And this security network has identified a new model, and in which improving social equality is part of what we need to address. It's not the only thing, but my belief is that unless we begin to better tackle equality issues, we will not be together enough to tackle the other major issues which society needs to tackle in the coming decades. So I hope that I've given a little bit of an introduction that might enable us to question each other, challenge me, because I think we're very much on a learning curve, which for many decades within the Society of Friends has been either a very slow learning curve or so unaware that it's not been a learning curve at all. So I think it's really over to you, friends, and then we could perhaps have a little closer look at what, as a group, we're trying to do in Central England Quakers to move the awareness forward. And in saying all of this, I'm aware that Bristol has been a significant place in British awareness of this issue. The Colston statue has gone viral. So I hope I can learn from you and that we can help each other. Thank you very much for listening. I perhaps need to be clear, Ray, whether you're thinking that I might facilitate this next part or whether you would be facilitating the discussion.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But there has only been 2 times within when I'm working with children, young people, where there has been a non-white person, non-white child within the group. And there was one time when we was having a photograph at the end, and the little lad was going to sit at the front, and I said, "No, you sit with us. You know, come on." Oh, all right. And it was, you know, you're a part of us. You sit with us, type of thing, you know, and that was a little bit awkward in that sense for him rather than for us. The other one being, the story goes around, and I'm sure you, Francis, it's not apocryphal because I was there at yearly meeting at friend's house and was chatting away to another friend, and this woman who saw this this African friend standing by, and she turned and looked at her and she said, "You know, you people always look good with gold." And hopefully we've got a bit better since then. But to throw in something which is slightly different, Quaker Friends are very complacently middle class. If we want Friends to grow, if we want, you know, us to be a multicultural thing, we're going to have to do a lot better at outreach, friends. That will change our meetings quite considerably. And are we ready or prepared for that to happen?
Can I respond to that, Ray?
Do.
For many years, I thought that, goodness, yes, how can we bring in greater diversity within the meeting, whether it be to do with class or to do with race? My experience with Wilhelmina is that I no longer see the race issue as bringing people in from people of color into our meeting as a priority. And this is because I've experienced high degrees of uncertainty and alienation, which Wilhelmina has felt from time to time. So I think for me, the priority has become more one of how might we work ourselves to help us to become ready to welcome people of color into our meetings so that they don't experience such large degrees of subtle isolation. I have been aware of a number of Black friends in Britain Yearly Meeting who have, in a sense, hit the revolving door. They've come in and been extremely keen, enthusiastic, engaged, and so on, and then haven't stayed for very long. So that's been another sort of example of the fact that in the end, they haven't found this is the place where they feel they belong. So I think we have to be a little thoughtful about whether it is a priority to bring in diversity. If we don't bring in diversity, of course, we miss opportunities for learning, but it might be at the expense of the suffering of the minority. Richard, I hope you're...
Is it all right to speak? There's lots of things going around my head, and while we've been talking, I've been looking back to my experience working in Kenya with Mission Aviation Fellowship, and drawn up two contrasting photographs. I'm not going to try and share them or do all that stuff, but both of them are barbecues at the Mission Aviation compound in Nairobi. One of them is the regular monthly barbecue held on a Sunday afternoon for all staff. Everyone's invited. It's held around 4 o'clock after everyone's done their Sunday worship, and it is only ever the white staff who are there. The other one is a barbecue that we held when we were leaving the first time we were working there. We didn't want the little tea party in the hangar. We wanted to bring everyone and their families in. And we realized very quickly that people that we wanted to come weren't going to come to the standard math barbecue. So we asked, why wouldn't they come? And it's the time of day. It meant they would go back in the dark to some of the various parts of Kenya you don't want to be walking around in the dark. So what would work for them? Well, what would work was a Saturday lunchtime. So we had a Saturday lunchtime barbecue, and the contrast between the two photographs is immense. We had kids at the lunchtime barbecue that had never actually met any of the white staff that their families worked with. They were this was a completely new experience for them. So part of that is to do with not going out of your way to make people welcome, but the other part is I don't think we will ever be welcoming to people who are different from our norm, whether it be color, young people, different cultures, whatever, unless we're prepared to go out to where they are. And to be honest, I don't think we are ready for that. But until we're ready to do things like hold meetings for worship at the Malcolm X Centre, and be patient while it takes people a while to want to come in through the door and to a room of white people. We've got to actually be, outreach is not just going out there and standing there with a placard. It's going out and meeting people and working with people and bringing them in and saying, well, you don't have to join us, but we'd just like to share what we have with you. Once we do that, and we are comfortable being in a minority in another place, I don't think we'll ever have the understanding to welcome people of different minorities into our space. There will always be a challenge. The two other things in my mind in this area, one's to do with race and one isn't. In Louisiana, I went on holiday, went to do, we primarily went there for the music, Cajun and Zydeco music. And Cajun music is white French culture music, and Zydeco music, it tends to be the black blues music. In the UK, they're all one and the same. You go to Cajun Zydeco events in Louisiana, they are very, very different locations. As one of the Cajun venues we went to had a sign on the door, and this is 21st century. This is not, back in the 50s. In the 21st century, had a sign on the door saying "Blacks welcome." There were no blacks inside. Why would you feel welcome just because there's a notice on the door pointing out how different you are and how, what an effort they're making to make you feel welcome? There were no blacks there. When we went to one of the Zydeco dance halls, we were one of 6 white people. We were greeted like royalty. We were put on a special table for whites, and we felt very uncomfortable with that. But that is how at least they were going out of their way to welcome us. And when we were able to contribute, start dancing, it all got a bit more relaxed. But you have to go to where people are to start to experience it. And it's not just colour. When I was working with Shore Start in Bristol in the early days, we had working across Sea Mills and Lawrence Weston. Stuart won't know these places, but the Bristol people will know. They're in the same kind of ward, deprived area of North Bristol. But the people that engaged with the project tended to be the mums in Sea Mills who had a little bit up the social ladder. So they had they had cars, and they realized that they weren't engaging with the mums from Lawrence Weston. So that the mums themselves said, well, we need to go down to Lawrence Weston. We need to go to Long Cross and set up a mother and child unit there. And they did. That's great. No one came through the door. They didn't come through the door because they saw people with slightly posher prams and pushchairs, but they didn't know. They didn't know them, so they wouldn't come in. And it only worked when those mums actually made contact with individual people and said, please come, I'll come with you to that place. And then they started to build bridges across the communities. We will not be welcoming, I think, to others unless we actually go out to where they are and make ourselves known to them, get to know them as people, understand what their needs are, and then invite them to share what we think we have and be willing to share what they have.
It's interesting, Richard, you used one phrase when I was talking with Wilhelmina, my wife, about this yesterday, the word about crossing bridges. And she said, you know, we're willing to cross the bridge and meet in the middle. So just interesting that image of bridge building, bridge making, bridge meeting, how you would work out where on the bridge to meet and so on, depending on the circumstances and what the needs were both sides. But for me, going back to the old Christian image of a gospel image of the plank in the eye, I keep thinking about, you know, there seem to be so many scales I've yet to remove from my eyes in order to understand or engage.
I think I wanted to mention a couple of things. One, I think, you know, we don't like doing outreach anyway. You know, we're much happier if people just drift along and the society grows in that way. And it was interesting talking about, hearing about alienation, because I've often felt alienated from whichever Quaker meeting I've been to. So perhaps again, it's something that we need to look at. And I mean, I know that I'm not good at approaching newcomers and saying hello, unless well, yeah, there is one circumstances in which it happens, but and also I realized some of the alienation I feel is something that I've put on myself. But I was thinking, you know, I was particularly thinking, you know, so, you know, I can remember going to, you know, courses at Woodbrook, coming back all enthused, and, you know, nobody in the meeting and the least bit interested, you know, this sort of thing. Listen, there's that horror. I expect most people have had that experience of a Quaker event where people keep on saying, "Oh, good to see you. We must have a chat later on," and you never do. It's perhaps we actually need to do more on, you know, work on our social graces. Or perhaps I do, because I'm a shy little creature, which and I must admit, I think one of the reasons, additional reason for not approaching people of colour is I'm frightened I'm going to put my foot in it. Yes, I'm realising one of the people of colour who attends our meeting, I'm not sure where she's from, which country. I think it was Syria, but I'm not absolutely certain. And I'm not sure, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But then I've only recently discovered that Ray came from somewhere like Hastings, or that wasn't Hastings, was it? Yeah. I've got a question for Stuart. I mean, the group that now that the area meetings recognised, it was it in being before, but I assume it's still all fairly new. Is it?
Yeah. What happened, Chris, was that the course that I mentioned, which was a Zoom course in 2020,
yeah,
when we went into smaller subgroups, tried to arrange us so that we were in regional groups.
Right.
And we developed what was called a Midlands cluster group, which continued on beyond the course itself. And out of that, we began to think, well, what is the way forward? Because we know that Quakers are very, I think, respectful of our own ways of doing things and structures.
Yeah.
And we recognize that, you know, if a concern was to rise, the traditional way was really from the grassroots of the society. And so a group of us who were in Central England Quakers, but supported by the others, began to think, how can we raise this with Central England Quakers? And so the document that went to them in it arrived at February, March this year, came from that process.
Yeah. Yes, I thought it was a very well prepared document to present to an area meeting.
We did send it to one or two other people around. I mean, I sent it to a friend in Glasgow who'd recently gone up there to work. And he asked, could I show this to West of Scotland area meeting, which happens to be the same area meeting as the one that Helen Minnis is in, the Swarthmore lecturer. And so I know that the document went a bit beyond Central England. I'm also aware that Edwina Peart, the, I think, Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at Friends House, is a little bit, doesn't always know what's going on at local level within the Society of Friends. And so she's welcomed my communication with her about what we are doing as a group and the information and the notes we're making as we move forward, all being well.
Graham.
Now the Edward Colston statue in Bristol has led to a great deal of soul searching about the name Colston.
Graham, can you get a bit closer to your microphone, perhaps?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's
okay. Certain street names have remained with the name Colston because it's too inconvenient to change them. But the schools which carried his name, and of course the Colston Hall, the Central Concert Hall in Bristol, have changed their names in order to drop the name Colston and not be associated with this dreadful man. I'd like to ask Stuart, and if he knows her views, Wilhelmina, about their attitude to name changing as recognition of the past evil of slavery, and in particular, of course, the changing of names of rooms at Friend's house.
Yes, I haven't followed this closely, but I think that the dilemma for me is there a way of using the name? And I think this emerged in the Colston Statute. Do you use the name as a means of correcting the history? So you keep it there, but you actually broaden the fact that this person did X and Y, which appeared to be positive, but actually some of the basis of this was hugely destructive. So I think in my own personality and in the way that I see the Quakers working for peace, I have always felt that peace is a persistent process, and that education is part of that persistent process. So then the question for me is, in removing or not removing names, how can that be used to better educate us on the issue that has now arisen? Now, as I understand it, in Friend's house, I think they've given the name of Benjamin Lay to the room that was William Penn. And from what I've read about Benjamin Lay, he was a true role model for Quakers, from what I've seen in the Friend and so on. So maybe I don't have a sort of definite yes or no to this, Graham, but for me, I do believe in the process of education, which in an issue like this will at times be uncomfortable and challenging.
Just to drop in a couple of points. I think it's quite. There's lots going on in my head, as I'm sure there is with everybody, when we consider what our prejudices are and what our patterns are, and what our own sense of exclusion is. I mean, I have often been in groups where I felt on the fringe or excluded because I've got a different way of thinking than other people, the sort of slightly nerdy approach that doesn't go down well in some groups that are associated with kind of sociological thinking. I used to be in a group called Community Building in Britain, and I felt that I stood out like a sore thumb there because I didn't interact in the group the way that the group's shared mindset was. And yet the group's mindset was about breaking through the cultural patterns that we have and establishing real connections. And I think that's one of the real problems, is that we sort of tackle things on a surface level without making real deep connections. The Green Capital Partnership in Bristol, along with other groups that I've been involved in, had discussions about being more inclusive, as does Extinction Rebellion regularly. And what happened was a separate group was set up called Green and Black. And it was mostly focused around St. Paul's and Ujima Radio in St. Paul's, and mostly just Black people in the Green and Black group. So they came up with a catchy environmental name that brings together Green and Black, but created a separate subgroup rather than creating real integration in the Green Capital Partnership. And I don't have an answer to any of this, but I know that unless the issues are, unless I talk about my own discomfort from whatever side, then I'm not seen in a group, and I'm seen to be, oh, just another white person who's privileged, who's sitting on the side of this. And I'm sort of thinking, well, I kind of have a sense of how you feel because I feel similar myself. And yeah, but you're white. What do we do about these things? And that where it comes round to for me is that we really don't have a highly inclusive society. I've been working with a company that provides shelter accommodation for the homeless. And that's a whole group who are basically not seen by people in the street, not usually coloured, but some are. I end up in these kind of situations, feeling the need to say something, feeling that the desire to be part of the conversation, but I've got a lot of stuff going on in my head that's peripheral, and I'm thinking about my coloured friends and whether I treat them differently or I'm treated differently by them, how we are in groups and so on. There's a sort of bottom line is that we have an amazingly unfair, unjust society in which community does not currently run deep. We live in nuclear housing, not communities. And when you go into a true community, like a co-housing community, where they've got a good process, these kind of issues don't actually just don't come to the surface so much because everybody's included.
Mary, you have your hand up. It says on my screen.
Yes, there's my face. Okay. I think Christopher raised an extremely important point when he was describing how he wanted perhaps to chat to a coloured or black person and didn't really have the words, didn't know what it was right or wrong to say or what would be offensive. And I think that's a very strong point. That's all.
I have been wrestling with something which I thought, should I say or shouldn't I say? And now I think I really should, because I would be annoyed with myself if I hadn't. Friends were at the World Conference, Friends, in an amazing place called the Rift Valley. And when they came back from there, the people chatted to me about it. And I said, what happened when anybody mentioned gay friends? And to a person, they all said, oh no, you couldn't mention that. They don't agree with it. I was a little cross about that, really, because, you know, we either believe in true inclusion or we don't. Richard.
I'm not going to address your last point, Ray, although I feel I could. It's more something David was saying about his discomfort in joining conversations is something I've heard the other way from people from minorities who are on, for example, boards of charities, that they're made to feel, because they're the only black person or Asian person or gay or whatever in the group, that they represent the whole of that group. And they find it overbearing. They find it, you know, that they cannot be that. They've come to make a contribution to a group of people, but because they're the representative, seen by others as the representative of a minority, they're feeling the weight of having to represent a whole bunch of people they don't know and aren't like. And you know, that I think is something of what you were saying, David, when you know, if you're the only white person in a room of a different group of people, that they will be looking to you as representing everything they know about white people. And that's not fair, because we're individuals and we're all very different. But that is what happens, and that's part of the barrier that we have to overcome. You know, when there's going to be a minority of any one group in a larger group, they are seen to represent a much wider group than they feel comfortable representing, and that can be a real put off to them as individuals being part of that wider group. And we only break that down when there is more people, you know, when we're much more used to it, when they are not the only source of information we have about their particular culture or race or community. And sort of coming back to where I was, you need to go out there and bear part of that pain in order to encourage people to come back and feel it with you. You know, we've all got to be pioneers somehow in getting out and going to places we don't normally go. But the community is an odd thing, particularly when you're talking about communities that share resources, you know, some sort of version of commons. A good commons has some boundaries, shared values and boundaries. Otherwise, it doesn't work, I'm told. And it's therefore self-limiting. It's quite hard to include into a commons people that don't share those values, or who don't want that commons, don't even understand what it's about. And that's where we are. We're trying to sort of reach out and work in the fuzzy edge between some fairly defined communities that work very well within that definition of what the community is, but are uncomfortable because they know that there's a big wide world out there, and we don't know how to rub up alongside other communities and stay as a community and be open to new ideas and new influences.
I find this a very helpful and rich conversation. And one of the things I didn't say at the beginning, I'll say now. Tonight, Cottridge local meeting are holding a film night with the Swarthmore lecture. And a group of us were just talking yesterday about how we might introduce this or deal with it. And one of the things we're beginning to feel is that because this issue that's before us, or this connected issue, can be so tricky and difficult, and should we have some ground rules for the conversation? And yesterday I was talking with one of the group, and we said, well, maybe we should introduce this Chatham House rule, where you have your discussion, but you actually, outside this particular room, you don't attribute any particular comment to any particular person. You learn from it, you share it generally, but you don't attribute. And in some ways that makes it a safer space. And I thought, well, hold on a minute, we're recording this session this morning. What does that mean for Chatham House rules? Does it mean that some people might hold back because it's being recorded? And for some of these issues, recording might be a bridge too far. So this was one of my thoughts as I entered this morning, but I just let the flow go. But nevertheless, I feel there's been quite a deep sharing, and also a sharing of vulnerability within this group, knowing that this is out there. No, and thank you for that. In relation to one of the other points that I heard raised, I remember around about 1994, a woman who I think was called Anya Summers came up from Bristol to Woodbrook. And she spoke in the main common room, which Chris remembers as the common room, which is now something else, the Cadbury room. And she spoke about the fact that Quakers were very involved in the slave trade. And in Woodbrook at that time was a recently retired senior member of the QPS staff, Quaker Peace and Service staff, a wonderful guy, great diplomat and so on, and greatly looked up to him. And he said to me over the afternoon tea, you know, well, she's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder, hasn't she? See, no, you see, this is partly going back to what David was saying about feeling alienated and you're not fitting in and so on. One of the things I've learned from Wilhelmina is that a chip on a shoulder is not a one-off event. It's the next stage in a long process where you've felt hurt and you haven't known how to deal with it, or you've tried to deal with it and you've not been successful in your lights. And this constancy of being in the minority position in a society dominated by other powers, realities, is something that is very difficult for me to internalize, because most of the time I'm in the environments where I feel relatively confident. So how one, maybe as Richard is saying, and David in his way is saying, that yes, we have to step into the place of the other, the mind of the other, but it isn't a one-off event. This is going to be a long process. And I said to a friend of mine in the Quaker movement, I said, look, this thing that we're on at the moment, this is going to take 50 years. He said, yes, at least. So, you know, I looked, I mean, in a way, I don't want that to sound as a prospect of despair. I think this is a prospect of hope. You know, we're going to inch away at this, and we're going to inch away at the climate. We don't know where the end is. There may be a devastating end. We don't know. But I think if we can hold in community that we're going to together hold hands and keep going, this is very important, I think. I think this one, I'm not depressed anyway.
That would probably be a wonderful point to end on, because it's a really good summing up. But I want to, I want to add some more and keep it going. Firstly, just to say that the record, we have had this discussion about the recording, and what we do with the recording is we make it. It's not just released into the wild in YouTube. It's kept not published, which means that people can be sent the link, but it won't be found on a search if somebody looks up Friday discussion group or the names of any of the people on it. So it's only available to people who receive the link, and we task people with being discreet about who they share the link with. And we have on occasions reviewed a session and said things were said on that maybe we're not comfortable sharing at all with others, at which point we didn't publish the recording at all, or we chopped bits out. But I found that chopping a bit of a talk out that was contentious was itself contentious, and that it was easier to say there were things said that were contentious and just say, we'll give that one a miss. But on the 50-year thing, I'm just back from a wonderful environmental conference at Woodbrook, and the closing minute that was read out at the end of the meeting, I was very concerned at the end of 3-4 days that we wouldn't reach something unified in a closing minute. And I was really moved by the minute that was drafted by a group. And in this, they mentioned that Quakers had changed dramatically, reinvented themselves and created modern liberal Quakerism in response to Darwin's, you know, destruction of the biblical view of the past and creating a far bigger past. And the point was in the minute was 50 years earlier. It's like, you know, almost a hasty response to Darwin. And I thought, you know, it's wonderful to say this. And somebody said that they were very, very uncomfortable with having the word Darwin in there. And I have no idea, frankly, what it was about this particular Victorian gentleman they didn't like. But I have no doubt that Darwin said a whole bunch of things from his era that are not appropriate now. And at least one person at that meeting was saying, more or less, you know, I'm not having Darwin in that minute, you know. And it was changed, the wording was changed to evolutionary science. So, which to me felt a little bit like Bowdlerizing and not acknowledging what had happened in that time and Darwin and who he was in his time. And yet at the same time, I felt I would walk past Colston's statue and think, it's not appropriate. It's just not appropriate anymore in Bristol. It has to come down. And there was a day when on a Sunday morning when I went for a walk around the harbour and I thought, Colston's coming down today. I'm not going to be there because of COVID and I know there's a meeting. I'm sure he's going to come down today. And that happened and that felt right. And the rethinking that's going on, or the thinking that's going on, and the thoughtfulness in the community, and the wave effect that it had, you know, it was a symbolic act that affected a lot of people around the world. I'm all for that. But at the same time, it was sort of, Darwin, you know, I'd better look into what he said that wasn't good. But I'm happy that modern Quakers are looking at climate change and looking at, you know, how we were in the past with slavery and race and how we are now with racism. I think it's, so, yeah.
Right, thank you, David.
Sorry, Ray. I just feel really moved to say something possibly controversial that's at the end of the thing, so you can cut it if you like. But what we've been talking about is coming out of our shells and going out where other people are to go to the areas of discomfort. And of course, what we do, and we're only a small group of people here, and there are lots of others that we'd have to persuade to do this. But in my view, one of the things we could do is to remove our shell, to sort of be vulnerable in the world and try to stay together as a community. It might even strengthen us as a community, is to recognize which of our meeting houses are not in the right place for this kind of world we want to be living in, and let go of them. There are our cave of refuge. We revert back to our little caves where we feel comfortable, and that prevents us going out into the wider world where other people exist. Some meeting houses more than others, but we really need to be challenging ourselves on that.
Any Christopher?
Yeah. I wanted to end on a relatively positive note, so I'll make an appointment to see my doctor straight away to find out what's gone wrong. But it was Stuart saying about 50 years, and I was remembering the first yearly meeting I went to, there was a non-session of yearly meeting. It was quite clear it was not part of the yearly meeting, where you know, a gay male friend talked about his experience of being gay. And what was it? It's been in the last 5 years that, you know, gay marriages now, you know, can happen in our meeting houses. So, you know, we do get there. And I'll shut up because I've thought of something negative to say. So,
Okay. Thank you, Christopher. Any other comments, friends? Well, I'd like to thank Stuart for a interesting and provocative talk, and over the next few weeks. Hopefully, we shall have other interesting talks as well. He rambles on like this because, ashamedly, he's forgotten what's happening next week.
I
Christopher
put a piece of paper towards me, which has got it on. Next week, we have Sue Bright is speaking, the challenges nurses face and the impact that this has on the patients on the wards. So
There you go.
there you go.
Come and be interested.
Yes. Will do.
And as that phrase goes, tell your friends. Thank you, friends. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, friends. Thank you, Stuart. Bye.
Thank you, friends.